Number one, I do feel as though the guys that played in that era automatically think their era was better because the 90s have been held up, the 80s and 90s have been held up by everybody, fans and media, as this golden age of basketball that can never be topped. And so the guys that played in that era continually defend that spot atop the hierarchy. It makes them feel more important. So all of these guys that played in the 80s that crap all over the modern NBA have a vested interest in defending the 80s and 90s because that's when they played. It makes them more important. It makes them greater. And it's an easy narrative because that was the height of popularity by the NBA in the 80s and 90s because of superstars like Magic, like Larry, like Michael, versus guys like you never hear Kareem go, oh, my God, the 70s were so much better. You know, you don't hear Oscar Robertson saying the 60s, that was the best time of the NBA. Because nobody really remembers those times anymore. It wasn't commercially viable in a lot of places. Franchises were moving all the time. The 80s and 90s is when the league really popped. And so it's an easy thing to defend. It was better in my day. And we oftentimes get caught in the same thing because a lot of us, certainly of my age, I'm 38 years old, grew up with the NBA of the 80s and 90s. That's what drew us to the league. So it's easy now for my age group, which has ascended into primary positions in the media, to then defend that it was better then. Which is a lot of the reason the narrative of Michael Jordan is the narrative of Michael Jordan. There's a lot of guys in my position of my age group that became of age as a basketball fan when Michael was becoming Michael and now have ascended to those primary spots in the media to bark it out. Guess what? In 20 years, when a kid that is right now 15 years old that loves LeBron is going to be in those primary media positions, that kid is going to talk about how it was way better when LeBron was in the league versus whoever is going to be in 15 or 20 years from now. So it's an easy spot for Charles to keep going back on the 80s and 90s where better was better was better. There's also this unfortunate truth. And the unfortunate truth is, yes, Larry and Michael and Magic never colluded to get together. But that's also because there was no free agency. You couldn't. When Magic gets drafted by the Lakers or Larry gets drafted by the Celtics, they don't get drafted into the Cleveland Cavaliers of the early 80s either. They don't get drafted into the New Orleans Jazz, some unstable, crap organization with poor management that never wins. They get drafted into the Celtics and Lakers. And Larry gets drafted into an organization that has Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale and had just won 2 championships in the 70s. And Magic gets drafted into an organization that has Kareem freaking Abdul-Jabbar. There was no reason to leave. There was no reason to collude to leave. A, you couldn't. B, your team was ready-made to win a championship when you were drafted. So that's the unfortunate truth here with this quote-unquote creation of super teams. The guys before couldn't.